Good morning, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple more seconds and then we will get started. Okay, it's 11:02, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to What to Include in a Kick-Ass 2019 IT Strategy presented by IV4. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started this morning. You will be receiving a copy of the slide deck and recording of the webinar later today. And please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation using the chat function in the lower left-hand corner of the Skype window, and we'll do our best to answer those throughout. In addition, we will have a formal Q&A at the end of the presentation. So if you want to wait until the end, we'll be doing a live Q&A then as well. And just to kind of give a little overview of IV4 and who we are an information technology consulting organization that specializes in security, Microsoft Cloud, and managed services. We have offices throughout New York State in Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo. And to introduce today's presenters, I don't know if you want to change the slide, Michael. Thanks. Today's presenters, we have Michael Montagliano, IV4's Chief Technology Officer and VP of Consulting. And we have Ben Wilcox, who is IV4's Chief Technologist and our team lead for the data center team. And with that, I will let Michael take it away.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. Hopefully everyone had a safe drive in. We have 4 items on our agenda today, and these all relate back to this topic of building a 2019 strategy. First, we'll discuss ways to develop an IT strategy in alignment with your business goals, which sounds really simple, but it's not always easy to execute to. To that end, I'm going to present a framework for tying these goals together that we've found effective. It's something that our consulting team has used in the field, and we think is a great framework for you to take under consideration. Then we're going to take that IT strategy planning and we're going to tie in budgeting to achieve the IT goals identified in that strategy planning. From there, we're going to move on to systems development lifecycle as another process that relates to delivery of strategic initiatives. And system development lifecycle is not the same as SDLC for software development. It's a different type of framework, and we'll get into that a little bit. Finally, we're going to close with some IT trends and recommendations for technologies to think about in 2019 for planning and budgeting. And they're not going to be any big surprises. We've seen that they're on the list of most organizations' top priorities, but we want to talk a little bit about how you can leverage those technologies to align with your strategic planning. The concepts we'll be presenting this morning are not the only path to a successful strategy. So take these as guidance, framework guidance for ways to get there. But there are many successful paths, and you may already be on the path toward building some of these out. Additionally, the technologies we'll be talking about do tend to favor a Microsoft-centric approach. And that's actually by design. While we're familiar with other platforms like AWS and Google and their cloud offerings, we are tightly aligned with Microsoft in our service delivery model, being a Microsoft cloud partner. And therefore, we're going to talk about what we know and what we're experts at rather than just what we have an understanding of. So for you, if you are in a different technical path, just insert here as we talk about these various technologies, or ask us about the differences between some of these different platforms. And then one last thing, throughout the presentation, we'll be giving you a lot of statistics from Gartner, Forbes, IDC, etc. And while these are great for presenting an analysis of trends across the world, We'd also like to understand where you are as a group in upstate New York. So what we're going to do, we're going to do some polling during the presentation. You'll see a poll come up on your screen. You'll be given some choices. This will help you understand, first of all, it'll help us understand. Second of all, it'll help you understand where you are against your peers. Now, we're really great technologists, but maybe not so great at audio-visual aids. So if the polling doesn't work properly, just raise your hand if you can't see it, and we'll try to solve it as we go. So with that, I'm going to get into the agenda. Let's start with business and IT relationship and aligning with business goals. So one of the single most important factors to getting IT right is a clear understanding that IT is not an end in of itself, but a means to enabling business outcomes, aligning with those business goals. IT is not just about implementing technology, but it's about unlocking value through IT-enabled organizational changes tied to business objectives. And to get there, the company must first understand what those business objectives are. How do we make certain that going into IT strategy planning, we have a clear path and understanding as to what our business objectives are? So, managing those IT investments. The first step in the process is to make sure you have a clear picture of where you want to take your business and what steps you need to take to get there. Start by looking at your business strategy over the next 2 to 3 years, making certain that you understand where areas for planned growth, change, or improvements exist. And that will help simplify the IT strategy and decision-making process and make it easier to identify what new technologies and upgrades are going to be the best fit for the organization. So we want to tie back everything to business objectives. And let me give you an example of the process we use as a consulting team when we work with organizations in building out an IT strategy plan. One of the first things we do is we interview all of the department heads and staff, relevant staff. We go through the organization and get an understanding of what's important to you, what initiatives do you have for the next coming year, what works from an IT perspective, what things are working really well, and where could there be some improvements from an IT perspective. And we take all this information, we call it the voice of the client. We take all this information from all these various departments and generate metrics for the organization to say, well, here are the key initiatives. And I'll give you one example where they were out of alignment. We had 2 departments that both had projects around building up an intranet site, and they were using different technologies. So clearly the feedback loops within the organization weren't there to make sure they didn't have overlapping projects or goals. So it's what we do. We try to help organizations with aligning with what those initiatives are and those business goals are. We create the feedback loops, and we put in place processes that will help them achieve a successful outcome. One client made it really easy for us. They had submitted, their organization submits 3-year plans, each department. So every department had a 3-year plan for us to review. A lot of homework for us, but also gave us some incredible insight as to where the company was going. Then we met with the IT department to ask how did they align with all of those departments' 3-year plans. They didn't have a plan. It was the only department that did not have a plan aligned with the rest of the organization. So these are the kind of oversights we're trying to overcome. So to that end, what I want to do is submit for your consideration what's called the VAL IT framework. VAL IT comes from ISACA, and they have a COBIT framework, which is control objectives for IT. It's similar to NIST and many of the other control frameworks that are out there, ITIL. VAL IT is the value proposition. So what it's used for is to help them as organizations go from one project to the next, never really looking back to make certain that a project was a success and fulfilled their business objectives. VAL IT works to fill the gaps. That business process management, and project portfolio management can't necessarily fill. So they do that by asking 4 simple questions, as you can see there in the chart. Are we doing the right things? Are we doing them the right way? Are we getting them done? Are we getting the expected benefits? So let me walk you through those questions and how they're defined. The first question, are we doing the right things, is the strategic question. Is the investment in line with our vision, our strategic plan? Is it consistent with our business principles and our strategic objectives? And does it provide optimal value, affordable costs, and acceptable risk? So the first question is, are we doing the right things? Second question is, are we doing them the right way? It's an architectural question. So is it in line with our current architecture? Network infrastructure, how we deliver services out of our data center? Is it consistent with our architectural principles, meaning the roadmap for what we're trying to accomplish as an organization? And does it contribute to the population of that architecture? Meaning, is it, and I'm going to use this term here, we use it a lot internally, we talk about a term called adjacent next, meaning is it the natural next step in the progression of our architecture and design, or is it leapfrog technology? Meaning we're going from this particular roadmap to something that's totally unfamiliar with it. We're unfamiliar with. And that leads into the delivery question. So the delivery question, which is, are we getting them done? Do we have effective management, delivery, change control processes in place? And then to the last question, is it leapfrog? Do we have competent and available technical and business resources to deliver? Does our staff have the training and the knowledge of those platforms to be able to not only effectively implement it, but also in transfer operations be able to maintain it? Do we have those required capabilities? And then the organizational changes required to leverage the capabilities, meaning once it's delivered, are we going to take full advantage of the systems that we've deployed? It's often heard that people know 15% of Excel. Well, if you take that to an organization-wide application, an ERP application, an HR application, are we going to fully leverage the capabilities of the system and derive full value out of it? That's part of the delivery question. And then the last question is, are we getting the expected benefits? So do we have a clear understanding of what those expected benefits and outcomes are? Do we have clear accountability to realize the benefits? So if it's from a P&L perspective, a financial perspective, do we hit our targets? Is it from a productivity perspective? Do we have the KPIs to be able to measure those benefits? And are we reviewing those benefits over time? Later in the presentation, when we get into budgeting, I'm going to talk about TCO modeling. So as you look at cost over time, you also want to look at effectiveness over time of the deployment of a particular project or technology or capability within the organization. So that's Val IT, and a way for you to ask very simple questions, but also to build a framework for how you align your strategic plan, your business processes, and then measure them as you deploy new projects. So we have our first poll question, and I'm going to pull this up for you. Give me a second. It's a very simple question. Hopefully everybody can see that on the screen. We're just asking you if you have a formal IT strategy process and plan in place. And if you can answer that, it'd be great. Becca, let me know.
We'll just give everybody another second or two. Looking about a 50-50 split, though.
Yeah. Looks like we have 22 responses so far.
Yep, I think that's about it.
It's working. we're impressed with ourselves. All right, I'm going to bring the presentation back up. Thank you very much for participating in that. We appreciate it. Let me know when everybody can see my screen again.
Yep, we can see.
Okay. All right, moving on. So we're going to move on to IT budgeting. One of the things to consider is that these are not necessarily linear processes. And you'll see when we get into system development lifecycle, they're really both vertical and horizontal in terms of how they're deployed. So when I talk about budgeting, you're going to do a cost benefit analysis way back when you're going through and building out your IT strategy. You're going to need to understand what it costs to build out a strategic plan for IT. So we need to take the presentation that way, understand that it's not a linear process. So just starting with some basic budget trends, we did a lot of homework over the past couple of months, reading lots of financial reporting, and you'll see some of those other statistics later on as well. But what we're finding is 89% of companies expect their IT budgets to grow or stay steady. Now, in another report I read, most CIOs either feel that they have adequate, somewhat adequate budgets currently. It's about a 40% split between those two, and then about 10% on either side say that it's inadequate or it's more than adequate. So really it's kind of a 50-50 split right now in terms of how CIOs view their budgets. You'll see that because of the corporate tax cuts, some of the IT budgets are growing. And another trend, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, that I saw for 2018 is there was about $3.2 billion more spent on IT in 2018. And the plan is that may increase by as much as 50% more in 2019. SMBs are making increases in hardware budgets, while enterprises are increasing their cloud budgets. And then 64% of companies are increasing IT budgets to upgrade outdated IT infrastructure. And we're going to get a little bit more into that because there's a life cycle alignment right now that I think a lot of people are trying to address as well. So building a budget. As business owners, many of you are accustomed to drawing up an annual budget for overhead, operating expenses. But when it comes to IT planning, the procedure is not always as straightforward as one would think. IT budgets have to combine both keep the lights on maintenance of existing infrastructure, along with staffing costs, and as well as keeping track of all the new initiatives, making sure they're on track and on budget. So there are a lot of components to building an IT's budget plan. It can also be challenging in deciding what falls under IT. We have been outsourced as virtual CIOs to several companies, and they all have a different idea of what goes into an IT budget. One company I worked with includes things like postage stamp machines are part of the IT budget. They're not part of an administrative budget. Other companies struggle with how do we differentiate between departmental initiatives. They need a piece of software. Does that get charged back to IT, or is that a charge back to the budget of that department? So there are some challenges as to what you include in an IT budget as well. And I'd like to draw your attention to the charts there. As you can see, so we're just talking about increases in IT budget in 2018. As you can see in the top chart, total IT spending as a percentage of revenue. It's one of the metrics when we're working on IT strategy plans for our clients. We talk about, well, what should you be spending? What's your revenue? And you can see the trend from 2014. It was up and down, and it significantly increased. So, while at 0.4% doesn't sound like much, in a $100 million business, that's a considerable increase in 2018. So, and it's the first year, really in 10 years, that we've seen that number jump like that. The second thing is, where are they spending? And as I said, it's no surprise. Security and cloud applications are at the top of the heap. Enterprises in particular, we've seen about at 80% growth in migration to cloud workloads, not necessarily all in data centers, but definitely cloud workloads. Security is on everyone's radar screen with the increased number of breaches and attacks that are occurring. And then some of the newer technologies, BI and data warehousing, well, it's always been on people's radar screen. The availability of these types of tools, machine learning, business intelligence tools in the cloud has made it more accessible to a lot of organizations, big and small. So what we're seeing is an increase in spending on those particular components. So how do we get the budget on track? First, you've got to start with having a budget at all. We're going to poll you on this. We want to see how many people actually have a formal IT budget. That I'm going to jump ahead here and let you know that we're going to poll you on that. So be ready with your answer. But what we find is a lot of organizations don't have a formal IT budgeting process. As I said, there are challenges to building that out. What do we include? How do we align that? And then the second thing is, don't just increase the spending, but be more strategic with how the money is spent within IT. If you build your strategy plan and you understand your roadmap and where your business is going, you want to align the spending to where you're going to get the biggest bang for that buck. So back to the 4 questions of LIT. And then look at IT as an investment. So while some items on the maintenance, purchasing, Cisco SmartNet or hardware maintenance, that's a line item in the budget for going forward and keeping the lights on. But there are a lot of upgrades, and if we're taking security and cloud, having a cloud strategy over the next 2 to 3 years to understand when and where you should be investing in that makes sense to you in terms of getting the most out of it, and then focus on productivity, making sure that these technology solutions can increase productivity. It's a good investment, and they quickly pay for themselves. The ROI is really good. And then performing a cost-benefit analysis. As I mentioned earlier, most likely you'll have done a cost-benefit analysis as you're building an IT strategy plan. What are the new initiatives we want to undertake for the next year or 2 years? What are the costs of those initiatives? Do they fit within our budget? Will we get the benefit of the spend? I worked with one organization down in Atlanta that the CFO told me if I didn't have less than a negative 5% ROI in year 1, they just weren't going to do it. So it didn't matter how elegant the technology architecture or design was, it really had to make sense to the organization from a cost-benefit perspective. And then TCO analysis, total cost of ownership. It's really important to include TCO modeling as cost-benefit. While the initial CapEx or year 1 expenditures may be X, the overtime expenditures could be Y. We always include a 5-year TCO model in any of our architectural designs to give so that those year 2 through 5 budgets get included in those years' budgets. It's not just what's going to be spent in year 1. And then all of the other things that are kind of hidden in terms of the ongoing TCO model. So training. Is there ongoing training that you're going to need to provide across the life cycle of this particular project? Is there other support costs? Are you going to have reduced time to market? Less maintenance. One of the cases we make for VDI as a technology is fewer touches by the help desk. So where traditional cost of a desktop may be $4.80 per $100 spent on a desktop, you can reduce that to $1.20 per $100 spent on a desktop. So have you included that in both your cost benefit and your TCO analysis? And then this is a rather simplified look example of a cloud design that we did for a client. This is the roll-up of all of the components of the TCO model, just to show that year 1 expenditure wasn't that far off, $100,000. But And really, from a business case perspective, the savings was marginal. But it did give them a view as to where their money was going to be spent in, hardware, software, maintenance, licensing, one-time fees, ongoing expense. They checked the box and they had a clear picture of, what those initiatives would bring to bear. Would they want to continue building out data centers and continue with that cost of on-prem, or were there other things that the cloud brought to bear that beyond the reduced cost that would drive the project home? Okay, that's budgeting. We're going to put up another poll question here. Gotta get content here. 1 second. Back and let me know if that comes up okay.
Yep, I can see it.
Whoa. There we go. Oh, this is fun.
Some people rolling in. Again, looking like a 50-50 split.
16 people responded. That's amazing. Oh. Excellent. We're good?
Yep, close it.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. All right. So moving on to the next section. So system development lifecycle. Again, we're talking about concepts and frameworks here. So this is about assigned responsibility. So the next part, now that you have a strategic plan in place, the next step is how do you deliver these projects? Remember back to Val IT and the third question, which is the delivery question. Are we getting them done? This is where a system development lifecycle, or SDLC framework comes in. It assigns responsibility for all delivery aspects to responsible team members, keeps projects both vertically and horizontally aligned, and builds in the feedback loops to keep each team member informed throughout the project. So the whole goal is to make certain that as you step through a project, everyone responsible for a particular area of a project has completed their work and their tasks and is tracking, and everyone's working together. They're all pulling the oars as a team. So let me just move right over to looking at the SDLC framework. So this is a high-level view of it, and what I've done is I've taken the Val IT questions at the bottom. Are we doing the right things, doing them the right way, and it kind of aligned them to system development lifecycle. So you'll see you have budget management, both planning and formulation, execution and evaluation. Project management, project initiation, determining the solution, preparing the project plan, design, build, configure, stage, requirements management. The IT-centric portion of it, project initiation, requirements development, solution development, implementation, and then transfer to ops at the end and maintenance. Enterprise architecture, making sure there's an understanding of the impact. There's an alignment to the architecture. Way back when we were talking about architectural alignment under the Val IT component. So when we're talking about the delivery question, it goes back there. And then tying in security architecture to enterprise architecture, making sure that the two are tied at the hip, that you're not trying to retrofit security as an afterthought, which also means that both enterprise architecture and security architecture are budgeted for. So as you look at the system development lifecycle and the project that you're going to be implementing, while it aligns with the architecture and you're budgeting for the solution itself, are you also budgeting for any additional security controls and capabilities that need to be tied into the project? This is an old concept. It comes about from a Gartner study done back in the 1990s that talked about project success. And at the time, 67% of projects either were challenged or they failed outright. So what this means is that in the end, the chances for a successful outcome are enhanced because your target goals are going to be met. Unfortunately, I just read a new study that the numbers haven't moved all that much. If I ask, and we're going to poll you on this in a second, but finding organizations that align all of these components together, we don't often find it within the organization, the proper feedback loops, all the communication that's required to drive these processes. When I first encountered this, it was as a security analyst. An international company had been hacked, and we were asked by IBM to come in and help them with this alignment. And we built this framework out based on the Gartner study and a bunch of studies, and this goes back, there was an SDLC way back then too. But we customized this SDLC specifically to this organization to make sure that they were doing the right things and they were doing them in the right way as they deployed, so they didn't have any security holes in their operation that then could be leveraged for breaking into the company. So hopefully this helps you understand that it's not just a workflow for how to deliver a project, but also to make certain you're hitting all of your strategic goals of protecting and reducing risk. And I want to tie this into one other thing. I want to make this a little personal. This framework works for other types of processes within an organization as well. So this is IV4's SDLC for go-to-market planning. This is at a really high level. But we've taken the same concept of a project deployment, and we look at going to market as the same type of project planning. We have a strategy or an idea, we define a business plan, we review it, the market assessment, we set target dates. Everybody gets in their lanes, meaning the whole organization as a whole, and this ties back to SDLC, what you're trying to do is get everybody aligned and stepping through a process. So the end result when you go to launch, for us when we launch a product, we have standards and procedures and training and resources and business management and funding. Everything is all pulling together, just as project IT initiatives need to pull together under SDLC. So the same type of framework works for many different types of capabilities. So we're going to do a poll question, and the poll question obviously is, do you have an SDLC process? Let's pull that up, and we'll see how you do.
Had almost 20 results so far, 10-9 split. Almost 50-50 again.
That's awesome. We're good.
Go ahead and close that one. Yep.
Thank you very much, everyone. Whoops, I got to bring my screen back up. All right. All right. All right. So I think everyone's probably tired of hearing my voice by now. So we're going to let Ben come in the room. What we're going to do is now just talk about some trends we've seen in terms of technologies that should be considered in your 2019 strategy. As you can see, it ties back to some of the statistics I gave you around where companies are budgeting. So it's pretty much going to align with some of those items we just discussed. But I want to turn it over to Ben. I'm going to have Ben go through cloud strategy with you. Ben, I'm going to give you control. So you're asking me. I thought I did. Oops. Ben, you have control. Thanks, everyone. Well,
let's try that one more time, Michael.
I did. You got it now.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Michael. So let's start off with talking about some of the cloud functionality and what to look at, and I guess kind of where the cloud is today and what's kind of projected in the near future here. So with the cloud, we'll show you some brief statistics here about embracing a cloud-first strategy. So a cloud-first strategy is looking first as you are requiring a new technology or service to the cloud and seeing if you can satisfy those requirements by leveraging a platform service or an infrastructure service that's running up in one of the many clouds out there. So in 2018, you can see some of the statistics here. IT spending was about 50% of the budget for cloud-based services. In the SMB space, that number is around 37%, and that's only projected to grow. Over the next 2 years, it's projected that that's going to go to around probably 60 to 70%, or even upwards to 80% for the SMB space. Enterprise workload adoption. Enterprises, larger organizations are projected that 83% of their workloads will be operating out of a cloud. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a public cloud like something like Azure or Google or AWS. It could be a hybrid environment, meaning some workloads are still on premise, some workloads are in the cloud, or it could be a private cloud where an organization may be operating their own infrastructure and keeping everything internally, but everything's going to be on some sort of cloud there. Average number of applications within an organization. This number is only going to increase, and it's kind of a split because you have to think of applications as two different things. Within an organization, users are leveraging productivity tools, whether that's Office 365 or Salesforce. That accounts for about 70% of the applications that a normal user uses within a workday. The other pieces are more cloud apps. So that might be a Facebook, a Pinterest, or something else out there that people are leveraging for research, whether it's news or Google or whatever. And then overall, just the overall spend is going to increase by 2020. We're looking at 60 to 70% overall projected. So you can kind of see from there that things are definitely changing, and the traditional on-premise infrastructure is going to be kind of less in general overall for most organizations. So implications for a business. What does the cloud bring you? So cloud computing can help you do more with less. If you think of the cloud, it's essentially the internet there, which has services layered on top of it, whether they're provided from one vendor or multiple vendors. But it kind of gives you this virtual office that gives your business the flexibility to connect anywhere and anytime. So there's a number of benefits for moving to the cloud. Variable costs. So no need to purchase a full product and services and big CapEx implementation. You only pay for what you're actually consuming at that time. It provides some flexibility for scaling of workloads. So you're only need to provision what you actually need at that point. So if you're rolling out a new product, and the utilization will be low and maybe you're not sure where the adoption is going to go, you can size your workloads appropriately for the users that will be leveraging it. So that's going to reduce some of the additional capital that may have been laid out in a traditional project. We see this a lot for organizations. It's becoming more important, time to market and acquisitions. A good example of this is we were working with an organization that they were looking at doing an acquisition, and they needed to stand up all new infrastructure for it. Capital expenditures, if they were to do it in a traditional manner with putting servers on premise, a SAN, storage, networking, etc., they were looking at about an $800,000 spend. We were able to help reduce that to an initial about $200,000 year one spend by helping them transition to cloud services. So by leveraging some of those traditional pieces, the additional capital that they had to put out there was less, and we were able to accelerate it because we didn't have to stand up all those services on site, and we didn't actually have to travel as much either. So there's some good benefits from an acquisition perspective. Time to market. If you're bringing a product out there, leveraging cloud services, whether they're from a platform area or a service level service, such as some of the web apps and so forth that are within Azure, you're able to actually push that stuff quicker. It leverages modern development, and you're able to get your product out to market. And then, you want to be agile. So the cloud lets you leverage multiple vendors together and the ability to do things more efficiently and cheaper than ever before. So some of those things, like the cloud would be considering like leveraging APIs or ingesting data from APIs. That data can then be moved and parsed into different tools. So if you have a vendor that, hey, maybe you like the platform for a lot of things, but you don't like the reporting, there's options now to be able to move that data into other systems like Power BI and get the data out of there that you want. And one other, I guess, last huge benefit here is, technology that was previously limited to larger organizations is now available to businesses of all sizes. For example, Office 365, while it's email, it's also built upon redundancy levels. And those redundancy levels would have cost an organization millions of dollars to build out. And, based on how they sell it, it's available for only a few dollars per user to organizations. So what should you migrate to the cloud? These are just some primary examples of where to kind of start thinking about this. So servers, virtual servers, physical servers, those can be moved to the cloud. And it doesn't have to be necessarily just, Windows servers. Microsoft Azure supports all sorts of types, whether it's Windows servers, Linux servers running Red Hat or Ubuntu. The options are pretty much open from Microsoft's perspective. Same is true with the databases. It doesn't have to be just SQL. Oracle workloads can be run up in Azure. MySQL workloads, Hadoop, any of the large databases, primary vendors out there, Microsoft supports. And then data, whether it's frequently accessed data or infrequently accessed data, the cloud can provide copies of data that's on-prem to make sure it's redundant and available if something should happen to your on-prem data. Or maybe it's just archival. You're looking for a place to put your old storage that isn't frequently accessed, but you need to keep it around for compliance reasons. And then applications. As you look to replace an application or migrate an application, think about the cloud first and how can I deliver this application more efficiently to my end users, make it easier for IT to maintain and manage, and deliver it quicker. So there's three types of personas that really embrace the cloud-first strategy. And I'm going to kind of lump the plug-in players and the hives together into one quick presentation here. So basically the plug-in players are people that integrate services and platforms into the already products that are made by other firms. So that could be an Office 365 product or Salesforce. And then there's hives. Hives are individuals or businesses that leverage shared talent. Internally at IV4, a lot of people wear a lot of different hats and we're involved in a lot of different processes. So we leverage a product to kind of help make that agile, and as we work on various teams together, how do we increase that efficiency of communication? So Michael, if you wouldn't mind, if you could pull up the other window. So this is a quick example of Microsoft Teams. Teams is what we leverage internally for group collaboration. So in this example, we have some different team groups over here, and I'm just going to scroll up a little bit here if we can. But you can see, like, for example, we have business development, we have a product team, sales. These are all just example ones. But a team consists of multiple people, and within that there can be different channels. So, certain groups within that team may want specific things. So in this one, we have a general discussion, we have designs, we have digital assets, we have a go-to-market plan, and legal and compliance might be involved, and maybe there's some other social trends. But you can see across there, we have chat in here that people can reply and respond. There's a file repository within this. There's links to specific material. So for example, if we wanted to review a product brochure, this can pull up the PowerPoint presentation for the product for sure. What's our go-to-market plan? And leveraging, for example, this one's in PowerPoint, but it could be in Excel, or it could be another third-party product, one of those plug-in players. So if we click the little plus button over here, there's been a number of kind of integrated things that Microsoft has built in that lets you tie in third-party services, or I should say their own services with this. And you can basically create a link to your SharePoint site or your website or something internal on an intranet. But there's also these third-party ones, and these are people that have become a plug-in player. They're leveraging cloud services to deliver an add-on product to an existing service such as Teams. And there's big vendors in here, there's small vendors. Some of these I've never even heard of, but they provide a specific service that no one else is offering at that point. All right, Michael, if you wouldn't mind switching back for a second. And then the last persona is the head-to-headers. So small businesses or individuals that really want to be able to compete with larger businesses. And how do you do that? You have to be more agile. You have to be able to be efficient. You have to be able to save money and basically operate as effectively as possible. So we have some organizations that we've seen them grow in the cloud. We've worked with them to basically move their infrastructure into Azure, and they've been playing with the larger businesses. One example that is well known is like Airbnb. Basically, they disrupted the entire hotel business by leveraging the cloud to basically grow their platform and operate it in a cloud environment. Without a cloud environment there, they would have a really hard time getting their name out and being able to grow their business the way that they did. So the other trend that's quite popular from a technology standpoint is modern management. And if you've been attending any Microsoft webinars or looked at it, you'll see this all over the place. It's a very kind of redesigning how we are handling IT today. So one of the things that's kind of going with this is that we're at the end of life for a number of products. So Windows 7, end of life beginning of next year. Windows 2008 Server and 2008 R2, same time period. And then we also have SQL Server 2008 R2 at the end. So what are some of your options along this line? We can either, you can replace this equipment. So that's, upgrading your on-premise software to the most current generation or one that's supported, and then buying new licenses, performing the migration. You could retire that product, moving it from maybe you want to move to a new platform level, whether it's an Office 365 or Azure or some other service. Some organizations, it's not possible immediately to migrate on a short notice, so they may have to secure that application, meaning that they're going to put it someplace safe where it can be isolated and ensure that only the right people and resources can access that server at the right time. Or maybe it's a hybrid approach. We're going to replace and retire software based on the functions that the app performs. Maybe not all of, maybe some workloads can be split into multiple applications. So this is going to be driving some of the modern management pieces that we're going to talk about in the future. But there's a number of things that have led to a Windows 7 end-of-life procrastination. While Windows 10 deployments are quite popular and a lot of organizations have been working diligently to get their platforms up to date, there are still a number of them, and we run into probably number 7 here the most, which is they don't have a good lifecycle management process in place. So they don't necessarily know what they actually have, and they may not understand, from a lifecycle perspective, how to get that into a operational or budgeting perspective where it can be replaced on an efficient manner. And one other thing that we run into too is a higher operational cost for updating Windows 7. There's productivity improvements in Windows 10. The newer hardware operates quicker. There's going to be improvements and basically a higher operational cost for staying on legacy equipment. So budget planning. So how do you get through this process of replacing your Windows 7 budget or Windows 7 equipment? First off, take inventory of what you need. So that could be running one of the tools out there that's out there, leveraging IV4 for assistance, or doing it internally through internal application or software management that you might have. You want to confirm that all your applications work with Windows 10. Well, most of them probably will. There's about a 5% rate that Microsoft has defined of applications that do not work between Windows 7 and Windows 10, and they could be a custom applications. So you have to really look closely within your organization, make sure you have a good inventory of all the apps that people are using, and understand where you are with the application lifecycle, and if you have support for it. Look at and evaluate cloud options, because with Windows 7, there are some alternatives out there for running some workloads in the cloud, and maybe you can go to a thin client and leverage desktops hosted up in the cloud. Do a risk assessment, understand what sort of risks you're going to undertake by moving to Windows 10, as well as understanding if you're not going to be moving to Windows 10, what those risks are for staying on Windows 7. And then prioritize the actions in your Windows 10 update plan. So modern management, one of the pieces that Microsoft has kind of come out with in the past year and has worked with many different Tier 1 vendors such as HP, Dell, and Lenovo on is a program called Autopilot. So in the past, when deploying Windows 10 workstations or Windows 7, the traditional method for doing kind of a mass deployment is you build a custom image, and then you're going to deploy that image to a desktop, overriding whatever was originally there that you purchased from a licensing perspective from the PC. And then you may push that out to the end user. You have to do some data migration from one computer to the other, and get everything set up. So Autopilot leverages modern deployment and management using Windows 10, Office 365, and enterprise mobility and security. So basically, it's a pretty quick process. An end user unboxes the computer. It's kind of shipped directly to them. They log into the device, and that device is known. It's been configured basically to push down all of the applications and configuration and settings to that device. So the end user basically comes back to a machine that's fully working within about 1 hour of time. It has everything on it that they need. So if we kind of look at the full process here, the end user purchases the device from the device vendor. That gets shipped and basically turned on, plugged in, etc. Within this process, there's a couple things that happen on the IT side. Basically, all of the provisioning and setup of the device settings need to happen ahead of time, so that users, basically the applications know what needs to be deployed to the specific end user, and that can be done through groups and etc. When they plug it in, it's going to be a self-service experience. They're going to have a few prompts, and basically they're going to be ready for business. If something happens, that can be fully reset, everything reloaded remotely, and delivered back to the end user so that they can log in and get everything all set. So it's kind of like it's modern management from the device perspective, modern management from the application perspective, and kind of takes IT out of the middle. All set, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. All right, I'm going to try to be cognizant of your time here and move us along. The last of the trends that we'd like to address is cybersecurity, a topic I'm sure everyone on the call is extremely aware of and concerned about. I'd like to start with some experiences we had from 2018 and our incident response team. So our incident response team responded to 11 major incidents. And when I say a major incident, that means the full incident response process, meaning containment, eradication, recovery, and hardening. And those 11 incidents all happened in one 5-month stretch. So we were stretched. It was really something to behold in terms of the sheer number of hours that were required to respond to our clients' incidents. As you can see, the average was 146 hours. The largest incident, single incident, required 528 hours. And that meant we were rebuilding servers, rebuilding systems. We also responded to 48 minor incidents. And an example of that would be a compromised email account generated from a phishing campaign that required additional investigation to make certain that the compromise was contained, and then we reset the account. So this represents hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of recovery costs and penalties to their clients. And we worked with the FBI, the Secret Service, New York State Cyber Command, New York State Department of Health, meaning that these breaches were high profile, and in some cases they fell under regulatory compliance rules. So we have a lot of experience at seeing this firsthand. It's not the ostrich in the sand, this can't happen. It does happen. So I wanted to show you this just to show you why it's happening. This is the National Vulnerability Database that NIST maintains, and it goes back to 1988, where you can see there were 2 vulnerabilities in the database. And in 1989, there were 3, so it was a 50% growth, massive. But if you look at around 2016, we reached a tipping point. All of a sudden, the number of vulnerabilities grows exponentially to over almost 16,000 vulnerabilities in that database. It's an incredible amount of growth, and one of the reasons that cybersecurity is at the top of everyone's mind. So this is the modern cybersecurity landscape. There's 4 components to it. I'm going to just briefly say there's an expanding attack surface, meaning because of integration of the cloud and SaaS models and premise, working from home, mobility, we have a larger attack surface to protect. We have very well-funded, motivated hackers. It's no longer the guy just trying to break in, a single guy, but it's nation states and it's organized crime. And they're using much more creative and sophisticated types of attacks. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, while they're a benefit to companies and they're ever expanding in terms of their use, hackers are using the same types of tools to expand the type of attacks that they're perpetrating. And you can see, going back to organized crime, it's very well funded. This is the on the dark web, per credit card or email accounts, they run from 50 cents to $20 per card or account, $7 to $8 for a cloud account. Healthcare records are still at the top of the heap, $50 per healthcare record, and that's because they can be leveraged with all that PII. They can be leveraged to do a lot of other damage. And the return on investment for buying custom malware, where it can cost you $3,500 to buy a custom malware kit, the return on investment is in the thousands of percents. We saw that the average $3,500 investment would return $86,000 for hackers. So the landscape has changed dramatically. In 2019, our predictions are antivirus will be dead. Years ago, if you've seen any of my previous seminars, I talked about traditional tools like antivirus and firewalls being about 30% effective. Because of that exploding growth in malware, hundreds of thousands released daily, it just can't keep up and it's no longer viable. Most organizations are moving to Windows 10. And then all of the things we just talked about, machine learning and artificial intelligence, really shapeshifter malware, be able to transform malware on the fly, hacker bots, algorithms competing against each other, meaning automated types of attacks, credential stuffing, the ability to take information that's already out there, leveraging usernames and passwords, and actually profiling you because of your presence in social media and on the internet, saying for you, what is the likelihood of you generating this type of password? They're actually building out through machine learning profiles of you and determining how to leverage, recreate your credentials. And then I just threw quantum computing on there because while it's still 8 to 10 years from being fully implemented, IBM just released a CES, a 20-qubit quantum computer, which will render all encryption obsolete. So while it's not today, and in 2019, it's something that we need to look at and re-architect and design around it. So we're going to make 2 recommendations today. And the first is people are still, because of our trustful nature, the primary target for hackers. Those 48 minor incidences were all around phishing campaigns and compromised accounts. When we perform annual phishing campaigns for companies, our success rate is somewhere between 30 and 40% in terms of attaining credentials. So this is going to continue as a trend. So train your people. One of the things that we are suggesting is people have to be trained. If you're going to move into Office 365, if you're going to leverage these cloud capabilities, while the technical components are there, people are still going to be the issue, and therefore they need to be trained. In fact, when we look at security awareness training, we consider it a program. It's the training itself along with security reminder program, phishing campaigns to test the effectiveness of the training, and to retrain those people that are called clickers. They click on things within the email, they give up credentials. What we found is by implementing security awareness training, the baseline testing, the first time you do a phishing campaign to test, it will come in somewhere between 19 and 21% failure rate. But within 6 months of training, that number goes down to 12%, and after a year, that goes down to around 2%. So it's a very effective way to close one of those attack surfaces that you see. And then the second thing I want to talk about is shadow IT. So traditionally, shadow IT is looked at as anything that's outside the purview of an IT staff, meaning where is staff going? Are they going to Dropbox? Are they going to applications in the cloud that we're just not aware of? And you lack visibility into that type of traffic. For me, it means anything that IT does not have visibility into, and that includes the internal network. If you look on the right in that table, you'll see mean time to detect and mean time to respond. The longer it takes you to detect something or to respond to it, the longer it takes you to recover. It can go from minutes to months, weeks and months. So this is a critical component of security, providing the tools and capabilities to the IT staff to follow these two particular security metrics: time to detect, time to respond. Forensic data collection. Are you doing logging? Do you have ability to capture and collect information relevant to doing a forensic analysis or discovery? How do we analyze the information? Do we have an automated process, log correlation, machine analytics to be able to look at the sheer volume of logs? We look at one organization with 20 servers will generate about 8 gigabytes of logs per day. People just can't keep up, so there has to be an automated process. And then how do we qualify? There's a difference between an event and a breach. There'll be a lot of events. IBM once said for their 20,000 companies that they evaluate, on the average, there'll be 172,000 events a year that they have to look at. That will translate into about 1 or 2 actual breaches that an analysis has to go and investigate, which leads to time to respond. Investigating the nature and the extent of a breach, and then contain, eradicate, recover, and harden. How do we neutralize and then recover from a breach? So these are the steps and the need for visibility, and in response to that, organizations like Microsoft are creating new applications and new tools like advanced threat protection, cloud app security, Azure information protection. There's a whole list of them that fall under their security trifecta. Office 365 tools for hardening and protecting, EMS, enterprise mobility and security, for things like MDM and MAM capabilities, conditional access, and then Windows 10, which includes things like Device Guard and Credential Guard, App Locker, BitLocker, all of these other capabilities that are now responding to the increased threat landscape and volume of vulnerabilities that are out there. Because of the time, we're going to go past this, but this was just an example of how Office 365 ATP functions. It's something we highly recommend to protect your email. It'll look for malware both in attachments and in content and protect you from that getting onto your network. So that said, thanks for joining us. Just to recap, Start with aligning IT and business, get a strategic plan, develop a budget aligned to that strategic plan, assign responsibility, get people in their lanes, leveraging a framework like a system development lifecycle, and then technologies to look at, adopting a cloud-first mentality, embracing modern management, and improve security visibility. To that end, we're going to close it out here. I'm going to turn it back over to Rebecca. We're going to skip the last poll question, and I'm going to let Rebecca take it over. Thanks, everyone.
Just wanted to see if we had any questions. We still have quite a few people still on the call, so I can unmute the audience if anyone wants to throw a question in the chat window or speak up. Okay, nobody has any questions, sound like. So this slide is just showing 2 services offered by IV4. At the top, we have our security posture check, which is a good pre-security assessment check. Basically, it takes a snapshot scan of your network, and then we see what vulnerabilities can be exploited. And we also have an Office 365 security hardening review, which basically utilizes the Office 365 Secure Score, and that will increase by 150 points by implementing Office 365 security settings. And Tyler, yes, you will be getting a recording of the presentation and the slides later today. And I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks, everyone.